Hello, thank you for tuning into our YouTube channel. I just want to give you guys a quick disclaimer. These early episodes on YouTube are going to be the early episodes of our podcast. A lot has changed since when it comes to the audio. So it's not going to be of the same quality. Not saying that it's bad, it's just not as good. However, all the content is still the same, so I'm sure you guys will enjoy nonetheless. Thank you. Make sure to like and subscribe, please. Hello, mainstreamers and cinephiles and everyone else in between. I'm Bryant.
And I'm Caitlyn.
And Operation Silver Screen is a go. Hello and welcome to Operation Silver Screen. This operation was developed to help myself and Caitlyn clear our desk of stacks of open cases. What are these cases? Well, even being the film lovers that we are, we still have a huge backlog of films, must-see films, that we have still yet to experience. So each week we tackle a new film. And Caitlyn, what is our debrief about this week?
Our objective this week brought into view a war-torn Japan at the end of World War II. This objective is our first animated film, and we sat down to watch the 1988 film Grave of the Fireflies. This film is based off an autobiographical short story of the same name by writer Akiyuki Nosaka and was produced by the anime powerhouse Studio Ghibli under the director Isao Takahata. Takahata is known for some of his other Studio Ghibli works, including Pompoko, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, My Neighbors the Bimatas, and one that I personally really enjoyed only yesterday. So joining us this week as we tackle this film, we do have a special guest. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Devin. I'm Brian's little brother. While I do love movies, I haven't seen a lot.
Yes, and the reason I brought Youngblood on the show today is not only because we watch movies together, but we also watch anime together. And there's a particular trilogy that we watched together that kind of related to this film. Something Caitlyn introduced to us as the Sad Anime Trilogy. Now, while I'll say that this movie doesn't really expand it into a sad anime quadrilogy, I think that this movie is the sad anime pioneer. And you're probably wondering, how can I bring this type of despair and torment into my life? Caitlyn, let them know. What is the sad anime trilogy?
I'm always happy to bring despair into other people's lives. It's kind of what I live for. So the Sad Anime Trilogy is a trilogy of films that I watched with a friend of mine. We had watched them together in the theaters, and it contains Your Name. That was the first one that we watched. The second one is A Silent Voice. And the third one, and probably my favorite of the three, is I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. So these are all films that will make you cry. So they will definitely bring that despair to your life, but they are also really beautiful films, really well done, really well animated. So those are three films that I definitely recommend. Your Name, of course, is probably the biggest name of the three, but A Silent Voice is on Netflix too, so that one should be pretty easy to stream. Why Want to Eat Your Pancreas, like I said, is definitely my favorite, and I introduced these to Bryant, who introduced it to Devin a little bit ago. So what was your favorite of the Sad Anime Trilogy, Bryant?
I would have to say A Silent Voice was my favorite. However, this being the Sad Anime Trilogy, I would also say that I Want to Eat Your Pancreas was the saddest for me. Though again, I did like A Silent Voice better. However, whole trilogy is great. And Devin?
My favorite one out of the three has to be The Silent Voice because it's the most relatable to me. As a movie that's more closer to experiences that I've gone through or I'm going through currently, closer to my age range, and the other two movies, it's either has to deal with death or supernatural things going on. So I would say The Silent Voice was my personal favorite, but also the saddest for me out of the trilogy.
Yeah, and I want to give out a shout out to my friend Connor, who I watched these with. We actually watched these in one sitting one day. And that was a rough experience. I don't know how we got through it, but we did. So I want to go ahead and build up our personnel file of our guests a little bit here. Bryant, I know you prepared a couple of questions for him. Do you want to go ahead and take that over?
Yes. So like I said, Devin is a young blood. He hasn't experienced many films, which does come with some perks. One of those perks is that you're actually able to develop a top 5 favorite films, something I used to have until I saw way too many films and then it became an impossible task. But Devin, you do have a top 5 and you told me that you changed it recently. So what is currently your top 5 favorite films that you have seen?
My top 5 favorite movies are movies that provoke the most feeling out of me. So the first one would be Lost in Translation. My second one would be Her. My third one would be Spirited Away. My fourth one would be Moonlight. And my fifth one would be La La Land.
It's a pretty good list. It's funny, I was actually rewatching on Twitter, they were showing the video of like memorable moments of the Oscars, and that whole drama with La La Land and Moonlight came up again, and that was wild. But it's interesting that they're both at the top of your list.
After watching La La Land, I was really excited for the Oscars that year. And I was really hoping that I was going to win Best Picture. And I was super excited that it did. But after realizing that it was a huge mistake that they did on their part, and that Moonlight actually won, I was upset. But after watching Moonlight, I think it was a few months later, maybe almost a year later, after watching Moonlight, it definitely deserves that Best Picture winner.
That list is very true to what you said, too. You like movies that invoke a lot of emotion and show complex relationships and a variety of relationships. That list right there hits the nail on the head. And seeing how this is our first animated movie, our first anime movie that we're doing a debrief on, and keeping up with that theme, what are your top 3 favorite anime shows?
My top 3 animes of all time has to be Code Geass, Cowboy Bebop, and I'll definitely say Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And that's right, Brotherhood, not the original.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go in here, post-edit, and take out that portion where you said Brotherhood. I'm just going to voice it over with the original anime series, since that is the superior one.
I haven't watched the original series in a while, but I still feel confident that Brotherhood is the better one.
Now, hearing your answers, Devin, I think both Caitlyn and I are very comfortable with the decision that we made today to have you on the show. And what a great show it is going to be. Caitlyn, you want to go ahead and get us started on this debrief?
So before we do get into our mission for this week, I want to mention that the first part of our debrief will be spoiler-free. That's when we'll talk about our overall thoughts on the film. But as we move into the more classified part of the mission, there will be some spoilers on the story. But we'll be sure to give you a heads up when we get to that part. But let's go ahead and get into why we chose to watch this film this week. So this film, I think, has been widely considered one of the saddest and darkest Studio Ghibli films. Roger Ebert himself that he was moved to tears when he was watching this film, and that it was one of the greatest war films ever made. Bryant, what were you able to find when you're looking into this film?
Yeah, so this is another movie that has come into the top 250 IMDb films. It comes in at number 41. Also on Rotten Tomatoes, this holds a perfect critic score of 100%, with 40 critic reviews, and a 95% with audience at 50,000 reviews. This also has been featured in 1001 Movies to Watch Before You Die, and as you said, this is one of Robert Ebert's must-see films.
So, this was my first time watching this film, and I think the reason why I put this off, even knowing that it was a good film, is just I'm not a big fan of war films in general. And also, I kind of knew what I was getting into this. I was a little bit spoiled going into this film about what was going to happen. I mean, the film kind of spoils it himself at the beginning. But, I just kind of thought that this was just going to be a super, super depressing film. So it took some energy to start to watch this. But I am glad that I did. Devin, was this your first time watching this movie?
For the first 30 minutes, I thought I did actually see this movie, but soon realized that I have never seen this movie yet.
Had you had a desire to watch it before now?
No, I actually never heard of it.
What about you, Bryant?
Yes, this was also my first time watching this film, and it's been on my list for a while. Much like your reasoning for putting this movie off, I know I had to be in the right mood to watch it, being a depressing film that it is, but also because it was spoiled for me as well. But like you said, this movie kind of spoils, or it tells you the ending at the beginning. And it's similar to why I've never seen Shutter Island, is because I know the twist in that movie, and it seems like the movie is just made to get to that twist. So once you lose that, what's the point of watching the movie anymore? But thankfully so, there was a much more to this film than just that scene that this movie is known for.
So going into our spoiler-free kind of opinion of this film, Were you glad that you watched this? What was your overall opinion of this film?
It's the first thing with this film. It's a gorgeously grounded animated film, and that has to be brought up that it is grounded because there's nothing fantastical about this. This is based on a true story. And much like its title, this movie with all of its color is a depressing tale, like we said again and again. But for a rather short film, this fits in a ton of emotion, not just sadness, but it really does prove the love Sieta has for his sister. And sorry, I'm going to butcher some of the names here, but his sister Setsuko. And though with that love, it comes with churlish pride that brought another emotion, which was frustration, which was emotion I didn't know I was supposed to be having during the film. Usually with a character like this, like a child, you don't really want to feel frustrated with a child because you have to forgive them for their innocence. But the older brother just makes some decisions throughout this film, and you do get frustrated throughout it, and you have to kind of, whether you forgive him or not at the end, that's up to you. This movie, it's almost a slice of life. But this is a film that I enjoyed throughout. I enjoyed watching this brother and sister. I enjoyed all the emotions that this brought about, and just looking at it visually. This is an impressive movie.
Yeah, and going to the story of this film, for those of you who aren't really aware, the film follows a brother and a sister as they kind of just survive during the fire bombings of Japan towards the end of World War II. So a reason why that the director Takahata chose to adapt this, or part of the reason why, is that he actually witnessed the firebombs firsthand when he was 9 years old. He had gotten separated from his parents one night and it had started, and he wasn't reunited with his mother until the next day at a shelter. So I think when he was speaking about some of these firebombs in the Japan Times in 2015, he said that most war films don't really capture the accuracy of what it sounds like. He said they don't really include many sparks or explosions. He's seen it in real life, and it was something that, he kind of wanted to capture the real life kind of consequences and impact of these things that happen. And he did this through such a microcosm of the life of this brother and sister pair. Devin, what did you think about this film?
I really enjoyed this movie, and coming from Studio Ghibli, I was really surprised because what I'm usually expecting from Studio Ghibli is a bunch of magical characters and animals and talking animals and creatures and whatnot. But it's a very, like you said, very grounded film. And my favorite part about this movie is how this war changes characters in a film, where you might not really expect them to based off of prior war movies and how the characters changes in those movies.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. When you're looking at these characters, they don't become so hardened at first. They still try to keep a hold of some kind of innocence, and I think you see this through moments where the characters are kind of playing together.
There's another theme here. You have the theme of pride. You have the pride with the older brother looking out for his sister in the way that he thinks is right, both looking out for her in a caring sense, but also trying to hold on to the child innocence that they have, still keeping up with the antics and having fun and everything like that, which isn't so bad, but there is a time that you need to look at it, and you need to look at it seriously, the situation in which you're in. You also have the pride with the aunt that they go ahead and seek shelter with, who takes them in after the incident in their hometown. And the aunt, she at first is very caring, but then she becomes rather crude to them. And then you also have I've seen that this was compared to the pride of Japan in their position during World War II, and wanting to keep up that nationalism and that patriotism and not wanting to back down during the war despite what their society was saying. However, then I also further read that director had no intentions of making a political statement with this movie. However, I think that you can still see it from that light, whether he meant to do it or he didn't.
Yeah, I saw a couple of things that said that this represented kind of that feeling of nationalism. Like when we talk about that pride, we're talking about the feeling of nationalism. But even if it's not political, I think what Takahata tried to do, he just kind of wanted to give a snapshot of this is what it is. this is what it's like. And you can kind of see that through the cinematography a little bit as well. He kind of has these wide shots where you're just kind of looking at the land, looking at the environment, and it kind of keeps you at a distance. I know when we're talking about There Will Be Blood last week, we talked about how cinematography can keep you as an audience at a distance. And I feel like at times it did this, not in the same way that There Will Be Blood did, but just to kind of give you that snapshot of this is just what life is. I feel like, too, he didn't try to be overly emotional. We talked about this being a sad, depressing movie, but I didn't feel that this was an overly loud film. He didn't add a lot of music. There wasn't a lot of loudness, a lot of show, a lot of fanfare in this film, because he just wanted to give you a picture. He just wanted to say, this is what it is, and what you take from this is what you're going to take from it. But I don't think he was trying to lead you one way or another.
You hit it right there. This really is what it is, film. No, it's not trying to make some big message. It's not trying to put a theme in front of your face. It's just telling you a story, and what you take from it is what you take from it. Another thing I found interesting about this movie is seeing the Americans as the aggressor. You know, being American myself, usually the entertainment we see, the Americans are the good guys in this situation. However, neither country were portrayed as whether the bad guys or the good guys. It was just war. And war was what it was and is what it is. And what you take from that is what you can take from that. But again, this movie isn't, even at the end of this movie, there's no grand speech. There's no real playback to show you that there is a message. But even so, there's still a lot that you can take away from this movie as a message. And that's up to you as the viewer. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, and talking about who's responsible in this film, it was interesting they never said America by name. And I was watching an interview with Roger Ebert that he was talking about this film, and that was something that he noted as well, that in a lot of these films like this, they don't ever mention the aggressor by name. It's always just the enemy, because it isn't really important in the realm of a story who the enemy is. It's more of the impact of that enemy. And also the impact of just war in general. And, I think everyone's kind of at fault here.
I'll have to go back and look at the war movies that I have seen with that knowledge in mind, and keeping it for the war movies that I'll see from this point forward. Because, yeah, a lot of times they don't mention who the aggressor is. Unless it's somebody that's completely in the wrong, someone like the Nazis. Because universally, everybody can agree that Nazis were in the wrong. But we don't say we're fighting the Germans, we say that we're fighting the Nazis. So that's probably why they're used so often. But I think it was a good move in this movie not to mention, the other nation, the opposition by name, because that could, again, be construed as a message. But again, this film isn't trying to put a message right in front of your face.
So in this film, we also see a lot of imagery, I think, as well. I mean, particularly the Fireflies. I read in one article that the lights of the Fireflies in Japanese culture can sometimes be a metaphor for the forms of soldiers who died in the war. What did you guys feel about those Firefly imageries?
Before even watching this film, I had an interpretation of what Grave of the Fireflies meant, and it held up throughout the film as well, which is when we see a field of fireflies, it's always this real-life, fantastical thing we're witnessing. We've seen it in paintings, we've seen it in movies. It's always a childlike delight that we witness. However, again, like I was saying during my overall opinion, it's in contrast with what's actually occurring around them. More in particular, what's occurring above them, which is the bombing and the planes flying above them, which in the night sky, when the bombs are falling and the planes are passing through, it looks a lot like fireflies. So I thought that was an interesting contrast between the two, because in one sense, you see all this beauty presented by these small balls of light, and you flip it around, and it brings upon devastation. I think it also presents a metaphor in this movie, because the older brother and the little sister go out and catching fireflies, and there's a point where he catches a firefly and he gives it to her, and she ends up smashing it because she's holding it too tight. This can be a metaphor for him holding on to his pride, for trying to force, keeping their childhood and their innocence and holding on to it for too long. And instead of, releasing the Firefly, it's much like they're releasing the bomb.
Yeah, and I think Fireflies too also represent just childhood in general, just childhood innocence. So when you're talking about a grave of fireflies, you're also kind of talking about the death of that innocence and that childlike behavior. So I think this is another film title that I think just works in a multitude of ways. And so I think it is an excellent title for this film. So what about the animation itself? Before we kind of get into some of the influence that this movie had, what did you guys feel about the animation?
Like I said before, this is a gorgeous movie. One thing I found really interesting with the animation here is the background. A lot of the backgrounds look like still paintings where you could even see the brushstroke. Now, while I want to put on my monocle and say, truly what the purpose of this was for, I'm not entirely sure. I just know that it was pleasing to the eye. I know another thing that they did for this film is they use no black lines. Instead, they used brown lines, which one was someone had challenged the director to do so, but it was also to give it a softer tone. This was made during a time when animation really wasn't that big. So to see this level of care in it, which probably came from a smaller team, you can really admire the love and craft that went into this.
Yeah, it definitely had more of a painterly type style. I didn't actually notice that about the line work though, but I do notice with the colors, a lot of times when you're watching Miyazaki's films, there's a sort of vibrancy to the color, but this didn't have that vibrancy for me. A lot of it was, I don't want to say it was desaturated, but it was definitely a little bit more so than what we're used to seeing. Devin, what about you? What did you think about the animation?
The animation here has a more realistic approach than other animations, which I really like to see time to time. And not only how realistic the characters are drawn, or how realistic the environment is, or just the setting itself, or the context of the story, but also just how the characters move, how they talk to each other, how they laugh. It's not very outlandish like other animes you may have watched.
Devin, you mentioned the movements of the animation. And I can't agree more, and I'll add to it that a lot of the movements here, they put a lot of detail to that animation that make these characters seem so human-like. It's humans, we have a lot of intricate movements. There's a lot of small details that are usually overlooked when people are doing animation. And that's something that, again, I admire about this film even more. The small team that went into this and put that, again, love and craft into this really shows.
So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the influence that this film had. I mentioned before that there is a lot to be said about how animation can capture real life situations. And one of the first movies that I thought of, and it's actually a movie that I haven't seen, so I can't speak too much into it, but it is a movie that is getting some Oscar buzz around this time. There's talks that it's going to receive some nominations. I've seen a lot of the best films of 2021 list, and that's Flea. Flea is it's a Danish film directed by Jonas Poler. I probably am pronouncing that wrong, but it is an animated film. It's not an anime film, but it is an animated film, and it's actually a documentary. The film is a story that follows a man who is getting ready to get married to his husband, and he tells a story about his past when he had to flee from Afghanistan as a refugee. So this is just one example of how in modern times we're seeing more and more animation being used to tell real life stories. So this is just one example of, we're seeing more and more of animation being used to tell real life stories. We also saw this with the film adaptation of Persepolis a couple of years back. My Grave of Fireflies, like I said, this is based off an autobiographical short story. So there is real life truth to this. Bryant, when you were doing your research on this film, did you see any influence that it had?
Nothing more than what you had said. This is just the pioneer film, that paved the way for a lot of serious animation that we have today.
So, and then another thing I noticed, or at least that I thought about when I was watching this, is just how that anti-war message also comes across in other Ghibli films. I mean, we see it with Howl's Moving Castle. I think even Princess Mononoke, if I'm remembering correctly. Brian, you would know better.
It's definitely not pro-war, its main focus is the environmental message. However, of course, war does deplete resources, so again, I can't see it being for it at all. So I think in an indirect way, it's also an anti-war message.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's more of an anti-industrialism type film, but industrialism and war go hand in hand, which we also see in a lot of Ghibli films. Also thinking about The Wind Rises being a big one that kind of touches on that. I mean, those are all Miyazaki films, but as far as Takahata himself, too, you see he definitely has a knack for these kind of vignettes for these more realistic films. I mentioned Only Yesterday as being one that I really enjoyed. I haven't seen it in a long time, but is one I enjoyed. That's just kind of a slice of life, kind of about a woman looking back on her life and what she experienced in her lifetime. And it's just a real life look, a real life snapshot basically of this woman's life. And I think Grave of Fireflies, kind of started that idea of just, this is just a snapshot of what's going on. You don't see too much of their past. You see some kind of reminiscence, but you just kind of see this moment that they are enduring. So going off of the influence it had, let's go ahead and talk about who we would recommend this movie to. So Devin, who's someone that you would recommend this movie to? Like, would you recommend this to like a general audience? Would you recommend to cinephiles, anime enjoyers, historians?
I would recommend this film to the general audience, since throughout this film I was thinking about this would be a great movie to show my father, since he really doesn't like animation.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of that kind of cross appeal to this one. I don't think you have to be a huge anime fan to get something out of this film. What are your thoughts, Bryant?
I agree with Devin. This movie can be recommended for everybody, general audience and cinephiles and everyone else in between. I could also even see taking our dad who's not big into animation films and sitting him down to watch this and showing him that not all animation is similar. This movie is just a testament to how great animation can be and how serious that it can be.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we have this idea that anime is for children, mostly from people who don't watch anime, because there's a lot of mature animated films and shows out there. But I definitely think this is not one that is for children, that this is one that is definitely a mature film.
To add to that this film is great for a general audience, I think it's because anime can turn off a lot of people from it being very loud or just weird expressions, weird comedy, and, weird settings and everything. I think this movie is perfect for a general audience because it's so realistic.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is a film that you can use to kind of introduce people to the genre. Because like I said, there's a lot of animations out there that are more adult. Just like I said, some that we mentioned is Flea and Persepolis is ones I mentioned earlier. But even in the Japanese anime world, there are a lot of mature stories out there. And I think sometimes you people who look down on animations, they just haven't found the right one that's going to appeal to them. They haven't found the right stories that are going to appeal to them. But I do think this is a good introduction into, that kind of more mature, more serious animation. So I think we're going to go ahead and get into our spoiler section of our debrief. So coming up ahead, we're going to have our classified section, and we're also going to go into a little bit more about our thoughts on the films. If we agreed with the critics when it came to this film and why it was significant. We'll also be giving this at the end our letter grade of the film, and we're going to find out if we cried or not. So if you want to listen to this part, either feel free to go ahead, or if you haven't watched the film yet, go pause the podcast, go watch the film, and then come back to see, how we thought about this film in our classified section. So something that was spoiled for me during this film, or for this film, was the death of the little sister. So knowing nothing else about this film, that was all I knew. And like I said, going into this, I knew that it was going to be depressing. I knew that it was going to involve sibling death, and that was kind of something that was a detractor from me from this film. So I was a little surprised starting this film that we knew that they were going to die from the very beginning. So that shocked me, because I didn't know that the big spoiler that I was waiting for was given away in the first, 5 minutes of the film.
It wasn't even the first 5 minutes. It was like the first minute you find out that the little sister had died. And I didn't know that the little brother had died as well. So that's something that I didn't know beforehand going to this movie. The little sister I did know. I'm not sure when it was spoiled for me in time or how it was, but I did know that going in. I did predict the ashes when they were thrown by the officer and released from the can. I did predict that it belonged to the little sister. However, I was reading later that the way the animation conveys it is when the tin can opens up, the ghost, her ghost, is released from the can, and you're kind of following the stories from their eyes, reliving their past. But again, this is a ruthless story right from the beginning. And it's even told more so, because this is war. It is ruthless to the point where even the adults are completely indifferent to everything that's going on.
Yeah, the adults in this film were so aggravating. They were the worst, especially the aunt in this film. I think she was awful. She accepts these kids into her home after the death of their mother, and she just treats them like a burden the whole entire time.
It wasn't even just the aunts, it was all the adults in this film. They were all very indifferent and numb, except when they were receiving something, which is something that this film portrays. It portrays society turning its back onto each other when the times really do get tough. They show it right in the beginning with the officer throwing the ashes, but also with the little boy. He's like, well, we got another dead one here. And surrounding him are another group of boys who look like they're on the brink of death. So yes, this film, everybody's kind of frustrating in some part. I think the aunt was frustrating me the most until later, which I'll get into when we get into that. But the aunt did make some rational points. However, her delivery could have been better.
I think talking about the brutality of the animation, something that stood out to me was just the image of the dead bodies with the flies. Also, when his mom is revealed, when she's all bandaged up, it's a very gruesome imagery that is shown in this film that really surprised me, just because I'm not used to seeing that kind of gruesomeness come out of Ghibli films.
Yeah, I have to say the scene with the mother was probably the most shocking for me and the most gruesome as well. And it even takes it a step further and kind of twists the blade when you find out that she's just burned in a mass grave. Because the older brother in this movie, he's carrying around her ashes, but now thinking about it, it was at a mass grave. So those ashes, hopefully some of it belongs to his mother, but there's a possibility that none of it or most of it doesn't belong to his actual mother.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah, after he gets back from this so-called funeral for his mother, he's carrying a box to his aunt's house, and before he enters the house, he puts the box in the bushes. That way nobody can ask about it, and he later retrieves it in the night. There's also another scene when they're living in the cave. He has the box underneath the bed, and actually there's a scene where it focuses on that box and it kind of lights it up.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I must have missed that somehow. Because I think I was just so focused on the ashes of the sister in that little candy tin, but I didn't even think about the box.
It just goes to show how much weight that he was carrying, both literally and metaphorically. And yes, this movie is sad, it is depressing, but at the same time, I had a lot of laughs during this film. I had a lot of joy felt, and most of it came from Setsuko, the little sister, and her relationship with her older brother. There were just so many adorable moments. I wrote in my notes how adorable she was, and about 30 minutes later I had to add on to my notes, even more adorable now. Seeing her in the flashbacks when she's wearing her brother's outfits and pretending to be like him, you kind of forget the sadness that is ultimately going to come to her. And it's almost like the movie took it as a challenge when they told you in the beginning, yes, she is going to pass away, by showing you just how great and lovable she actually is. And her relationship with her brother.
Yeah, I think especially during that, it's like a little flashback moment after she does pass away. I think that was probably one of the more beautiful parts of the film for me personally. Just seeing flashbacks of her just living life, being happy, even through all this, and just doing things that normal kids do. It was very beautiful to me in that moment. Devin, what are some moments that you liked from the film?
Some happy moments, please, or I'm going to start crying.
The happiest moments for me in this movie are moments that have the brother and little sister playing together, just figuring out stuff and everything. And at one point in this movie, it shows a flashback. And in this flashback, it's a good moment for the film to breathe. And it shows how adorable this little girl is.
I think also just the time with them at the beach was sweet to see. I mean, they definitely got along very well. And when they were at the aunt's house, enjoying the rice and finding enjoyment in just this little sustenance that they could get, it was nice to see. So that was some of our happier moments. Let's go back to some of those more frustrating moments, because I know that there were a lot that I found frustrating.
I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one that was frustrated with some things that occurred in this movie, but I'm going to let you go ahead first. What frustrated you in this movie?
So I had a lot of frustration with the brother, to be honest. I think there's a part in the film where he's talking to an adult who used to provide him food but cannot any longer. And he says, you need to suck up your pride and go back to your aunt because you can't survive outside of a system. At this point, they've taken shelter in an old shelter and they're just kind of living out in the wild. And while I don't know for sure that the aunt would have welcomed him back with open arms, I think that he should have sucked up his pride a little bit. He should have tried to do his best to provide for his sister in whatever way he can. And I feel like there's more that he could have done in that regard. Another frustrating moment for me, I think, was also the doctor. I think was probably the most frustrating character as well. When diagnosing this child, he just said that she was malnourished, even though, she has diarrhea, she has a rash all over her skin, she's barely clinging on. And he said, oh, well, she just needs food. And that was it. There wasn't any other kind of diagnosis, any other way of trying to help this girl. It was just, well, you just need to get her some food and then she'll be all right. And that obviously is not the case. Brian, what were moments that you thought were frustrating?
The older brother was very frustrating for me as well, much for the same reasons as yours. The doctor, not so much. I just saw the doctor as being a medical professional in a time of war he just did not have the resources, and he can't provide emotion to every single one of his patients. I mean, even times of peace, you see that with medical professionals, and you see that with law enforcement. If they don't have the resources and they can't help, that happens a lot. Almost every other call you have, you can't do anything. So I can see his disposition with it all. And that was with a lot of the adults in this film. So I can't really blame them too much. Now, as for the brother frustrated me because he had a lot of times in which he could have fixed the situation, especially when the farmer had told him, hey, swallow your pride and go back. But like holding on to that Firefly for too long, he didn't go back. He wanted to continue doing what he thought was not only best, but most enjoyable for his little sister. And, that was kind of frustrating to watch because that they were going to suffer because of his decisions. Now, I did feel a little bit better with my emotion because I found that this was kind of the intention of the film to display this pride. I found out that the autobiographical short story that this is based on, it was by Nasaka, and he created it to come to terms with his loss of his little sister because she died of famine and he blamed himself as well. And this was kind of his way of apologizing. Now, I'm not sure how much he was really to blame. I couldn't find details of the situation. And when it comes to survivor's guilt, I mean, even if you're just there, you may blame yourself, whether you could have done something or not. So I wasn't really sure how much to actually say, like, this was his fault. But again, the movie is not trying to justify his behavior or anything. So that, I think, frustration is an acceptable emotion to have with this. And I mean, the frustration could have came from me being an older sibling myself, the oldest sibling at that, and also kind of having a protective personality. There's just a lot of times where I thought he could have made a better decision, even when he goes to the bank finally, and to find out that he had 3,000 yen, which was almost half of what he had in total in the beginning, that helped him out so much. But again, I had to remind myself that this was a child. And I'm not really sure, it may not mean anything, but if I was in that position of the victim, I would forgive Misaka. Again, he was just a child. He was doing what he thought was right. And you can't blame somebody like that. There was innocence involved. There was no malicious intent. And I was wondering too, Caitlyn, because you're the oldest sibling, right? How did you feel about this from that position?
Yeah, I am. I have 3 younger brothers. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it was so easy to be frustrated with the older brother, because when it comes to sibling stories like that, you can't help but, as an older sibling, run the scenario in your head, like, okay, well, what would I do if I was in this situation? What kind of resources, what kind of lengths would I go to take care of my siblings. So I think I'm on the same page as you are, Bryant. I am curious, Devin, your view just as the younger sibling, the youngest, because there is 3 of you. So do you have any different thoughts on it, being the youngest sibling?
As a younger sibling, I don't really think this gives me a different perspective, but I will say that I actually was not frustrated by the older brother. I think for him being a kid in times of war, you might think of him, growing up to be the savior, being heroic, like you see in other movies. But I think, times like this, people can sway either way. And for him, he was trying to balance that out through the whole entire movie. I think, all he wanted to do was just make his little sister happy. She didn't want to stay at the aunt's house. He was like, all right, fine, we're leaving. They wanted to play. He wanted to be there for her. Since this is based off of a real story and a real person, I can't really blame him for the things that he done. He's still a kid. It's still war times. I have never been in that type of situation, and not even that. So I really wouldn't know what to expect. So I didn't really have any expectations for him. So being a true story, I really wasn't frustrated.
What did you think of the decision to hide their mother's death from his little sister?
Now, I understand his decision not to tell his sister right away, or if he was ever even planning to tell his sister. I mean, he was already carrying so much, and that's such a hard thing to do, to tell anyone, let alone someone that's related to you, that a loved one had just died. And especially, that being basically their last parent. Granted, he didn't know that his father had died yet, but he was absent.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And as far as not telling his sister, that definitely is never an easy conversation to have. And also just because of her age, you don't really know, how much of a grasp of what death is at that young age, what they have, so I wouldn't even know where to start with that topic of how you even say anything. But it is unfortunate that she did have to hear from the aunt instead of him, because I know that he would have probably delivered it in a much more empathetic sort of way.
It was interesting seeing a character like this, though. Someone that you're rooting for frustrate you so much with all the bad decisions that they're making, because there have been films before where characters continue to make bad decisions, but you're not necessarily rooting for them. 2 films that come to mind were the ones done by the Safdie brothers, Uncut Gems and Good Times. However, for a character, again, that you're rooting for and still messing up time and time again, the closest thing that I could think of in this scenario is comparing this to the Peanuts, comparing this to Charlie Brown.
You'll have to explain this one.
Yeah, if Charlie Brown was left to take care of his sister, this is probably what I would expect to happen. The only thing is missing is Lioness coming in at the end and saying, "Hey, Chuck, don't worry, you're just a kid." So yeah, this was the World War II of Peanuts for me.
Oh, jeez, it just comes out wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, exactly, with the parents. Because just like the Peanuts, the parents really aren't doing anything. They're just, just yelling at the kids, wah, 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 wah.
That's honestly true, but isn't a bad comparison or a bad way to see it. But not a comparison I was expecting at all. So does Snoopy make you cry?
Yeah, Snoopy always, makes me cry. No, but for real, this movie, being known as the saddest anime movie, I don't usually cry during films. I may tear up, some more than others, of course. This film, though, I think the reason that I didn't tear up or anything is because when it comes to war, it kind of pulls me out because I can't relate to it. It's not something that's close to home for me. And I'm talking about like PTSD and things like that, yes, because I have, friends that have experienced that and are experiencing that. So, that I can feel more emotion towards that. But not being in a war-stricken country or being in war, that I don't get that level of emotion from this. And then also with the frustration in here, that emotion was kind of battling the upsettingness I had towards this. But how did you feel? Do you think this is the saddest anime movie out there? Did this make you tear up?
I would say this is probably the most depressing, but I wouldn't say it's the saddest. Like you, I didn't shed a tear. I didn't even tear up at all. And it's not that this wasn't depressing and but I wasn't feeling it, or unless unless we're both just awful people. We're just cold-hearted people over here. But no, I don't think that's it. I think that the way the film presented this death was very just, this is how it is. Like I said, they don't really use a lot of flair to kind of add to that emotion. And when she died, she just kind of fell asleep, and then there was a wide shot, and he was like, and then she never woke up. And it was kind of just matter of fact. It wasn't a really strong emotional moment. I think the flashbacks after were probably more emotional, but also not to the point where I was shedding a tear. So yeah, I think it's depressing overall, and I think it's a sad moment, but I do think some of this is the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life is a little extreme, just because, like I said, I don't think it was meant to have that emotion come out of you. I think it was just meant to be, and if you had that emotion, that's just what it is. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. And Devin, you joining me for the Sad Anime Trilogy, watching this movie with me, and liking movies that invoke a lot of emotion, how do you feel to the title of this film being the saddest anime ever?
I think it depends on who you are and what type of experiences you have had. If you're an older brother, older sister, a parent, or if you're just simply somebody who dealt with death before, you might feel a greater connection than I have with this film. Being the youngest and being very young, I still have not dealt with death like that before. So even though there is death all around this film, that this is a wartime, there's dead bodies everywhere, there's chaos, I still wouldn't say this is the saddest anime movie for me personally.
Yeah, and usually anything that involves siblings usually does get me right in the heart. But I do think knowing what was coming and kind of just being a film that was saturated in death, in grief, it just kind of, it didn't hit me as hard at that final moment.
I agree. I'm the same way. When you have a movie that's just saturated in sadness from beginning to end, there's very few movies that will still catch me with that level of emotion at the end, as compared to something where the sadness is unexpected, and it catches you off guard, or it hits your blind side. That's when it really gets me.
Yeah, I agree. This one didn't have a moment that catches you off guard. And I do agree with your earlier statement, too, that some of the frustration with the brother might have also been a factor with that, of why that didn't impact me quite as much as I expected it to, because I think I was just more irritated than anything else. Of course, when I say I'm irritated with him, I don't mean, he is still a child, and I still feel for him and his struggle. So I'm trying not to be too harsh with him. I mean, I don't want to be harsh. I don't think of him harshly. I think everything that he did, I can understand from the lens of a child. But just like I said, being an older sister, it does give a lot of frustration. So as far as this being a war movie, like I said, Roger Ebert did say that this is one of the greatest war films ever made. We know that's not my favorite genre, and there's many that I haven't seen, but Bryant, having seen a lot of war films, do you think that is true? How does this hold up to other war films?
This holds up well. I haven't seen too many war films. I'm not a big war film buff. I do have a favorite war film, which is Platoon. Most of the war films that you watch, though, follow a soldier. So this is one of the unique films that follows, the victim of war, but from a civilian point of view. So I found that very interesting. And if I was to lay out, all the war movies and everything, this definitely would be up there on the list.
So let's talk a little bit about why this film was significant for its time. So this was released in 1988, which I think is about near the start of the Studio Ghibli kind of reign era, whatever you want to call it. It was one of their earlier films. So I definitely think that as far as for the studio, it definitely held a lot of significance for the studio. But what about otherwise for its time?
Yeah, we said it again and again. This is the pioneer of serious animation films. The producers didn't want to really back this film. They were persuaded when Studio Ghibli said they'll go ahead and do a back-to-back double feature with My Neighbor Totoro, which is a very odd pairing. And actually, most people left after watching My Neighbor Totoro anyway, because, well, after watching that, you don't really want to be brought down and sad. You want to leave the theater happy.
It is kind of a weird double feature because they're very different movies. I mean, both feature, both are about childhood. They both feature young girls in particular, but very, very different kind of tunes. Something that I wish I had looked a little bit more into is just the process of making these films. I mean, I've seen some documentaries and stuff about Studio Ghibli that's more focused on Miyazaki and a little bit more about how he approaches his process. But as far as, the animation and stuff, how animation has changed over time, I mean, this anime looked pretty darn good. Like you said, there's more of a painterly style to the backgrounds that I think is typically used in the Studio Ghibli films, and especially for Takahata's films with My Neighbor the Yamadas and The Tale of Princess Kaguya. They definitely have more of a painterly kind of unique look to them, even more so than Grave of Fireflies. But I would be a little bit interested to see a little bit of how just the process of making these films was like back then and how it might have changed over time. Maybe we'll revisit that in a later episode. We'll go back to that because I know this won't be our only animated film that we take a look at. So hopefully we get a chance to go into that a little bit more. But I do think that the animation definitely holds up. Do you think that the story holds up? Do you think that this film in general holds up over time?
Yeah, this is going to be a timeless film. The animation holds up, of course. We talked about that. But also, this is just something that we always need to consider when we go to war. Granted, we're not the ones making that decision, but this is something that's usually overlooked when these battles are being fought. And yeah, it's going to happen again. And hopefully, we don't have another story like this, but we may just have that. So yes, this is always going to remain a piece that is relevant.
Devin, what do you think?
Hand-drawn animation seems to be timeless compared to other 3D animations where as time goes on, 20, 30 years later, it just keeps getting better and better and better. Even old Toy Story, it looks even a bit janky. And before that, there was animated movies that looked even worse than that. And some of those might even be hard to watch. But like some old movies like Aladdin, Lion King, and Little Mermaid, they still hold up. So I still think that a movie like this being hand-drawn is always going to be timeless.
I mean, you're right. It is subjective, but I definitely agree that 2D animation, it does have that timeless quality to it. It does hold up. And it's kind of a shame that we're not doing more 2D animation in the Western world because it just always is such a pleasure to see. 3D animation, technology is always changing. So I understand what you're saying, but some of the older 3D animation just doesn't hold up quite as well. I mean, it still looks good.
Hand-drawn animation, I will always appreciate it, just how I appreciate art that was made 200 years ago that I see in a museum. It's always going to be timeless for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's just sort of a beauty to it because, and also you can tell that so much work has gone into it. I mean, same with 3D animation. I'm not dismissing 3D animation and all those who work on 3D animation. That kind of painterly quality that I mentioned before, it is just a good sight to see. And just the way that this film, just presented such a bleak world and with pops of beauty here and there, it was just really nice to see. So I think we can go ahead and move on into our overall rating of this film. And if you have any final comments, please feel free to share them as well. But Devin, as a guest, let's go ahead and start with you. What letter grade would you give this film?
I would give this movie an A- for being a gorgeous looking film and a beautiful short story that can be relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah, and going into the length, I know we talked about the length a little bit before. Bryant, I know you said that you felt it felt longer than what it was. And I think the opposite. I felt it felt really short. And I think this movie kind of went against my expectations for what I thought this film was going to be because I was expecting more of a travel narrative. Like I thought it was like going to be about these siblings who went from point A to point B. But it was really kind of stationary to this one area. I mean, they do travel to the shelter, but that's about it. It's still in the same town. At one point I paused the movie because I had to get up and do something real quick. And I was surprised that was almost at the end of his film. And I was like, wow, that really blew by. So the pacing for me felt really fast. But I did enjoy this film. For me, I'm going to give this an A- as well, because I really do think it is an excellent film. The only thing that's giving that minus for me is just the rewatchability. This isn't a film that I'm going to be in a rush to go back and watch. Bryant, what about you? What would you give this?
I'm also actually going to go ahead and give it an A-. Not giving it an A+ or A just because it's not a grand movie. It's a short, simple tale, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's still a great and impressive film, so the minus is not at all negative. It's just short of being grand, which is no problem at all because this movie, what it sets out to do, it does very well, and it is entertaining.
I'm kind of surprised that we all are kind of on the same page for this one. You know, out of 3 people, you know, we have a guest this time. We all gave it the exact same rating. You know, that means that we're reliable, right? Yeah, I hope you guys, if you haven't seen this, that be in the right mindset to go into this movie. Because like I said, it is a very depressing film. But do take a look when you have a chance, because it definitely is worth watching. So I think that wraps up our debrief for Grave of Fireflies, and I want to thank Devin for joining us here and giving us his thoughts as well. Bryant, what do we have in store next week?
Yeah, so on February 1st, we're actually going to be going down some familiar territory, or familiar case, at least for me. In celebration of Black History Month, we're going to be watching Night of the Living Dead. Now you're wondering what is the significance of that in Black culture? Well, you'll just have to go ahead and tune in and listen. So come join us in the boarded up house, not the basement, because they're coming to get you February 1st.
I'm definitely excited because I've never seen that one, but I'm excited to see, you know, how this ties in and how this goes. But yeah, so make sure you listen to us if you want to listen to us. Like I said, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you are listening to one and want to check out the other. But also you can find us on social media. On Facebook, it's Operation Silver Screen, but we're Op Silver Screen on Instagram and Twitter. Once again, that's Op Silver Screen. We'll also have a couple more other places that you can find us coming up in our next episode. We'll let you know about that when we get there. But yeah, so we're looking forward for you to listen in, and we're looking also to hear your thoughts on Grave of Fireflies. So like I said, go on our social media, tell us what you thought about this, tell us if you agree with us or not, and also just drop us some of your favorite anime and animated films, because I'd be curious to see what those are. All right, until next time.
Till next time, I'm Bryant.
And I'm Caitlyn.